Yeah, definitely grab a notebook and a pen because we're going to be here for a little while. We're getting pretty deep into the topics we'll be discussing today. So if you're really interested, I would definitely grab a notebook.
I also think just a little process of grounding this in, because I think these concepts can be a little heady, a little bit, it's like, what's the point? Or it's like this poetical analysis, this literary class about reality maybe, but we've been doing a lot of talking, a lot of thinking, and also conversations with our friends and colleagues, and I think just like figuring out what is the real purpose and value of alchemy, hermetics, story. And I mean, I think many of you guys are familiar with astrology, you're familiar with human design, or even, I mean, the concept that your beliefs shape your reality. And so the idea that storytelling is the fabric, is the foundation of who you are, how you move through the world, both consciously and unconsciously. And this conversation is basically us dialing in the framework, the building blocks, the code, if you might say, like a computer coder of reality. And I think for those who don't necessarily practice operational alchemy, that alchemical lab processes are the observation of nature. It's the separation, purification, and recombination of matter and consciousness and matter interacting with one another. And so that all derives from Hermetics, which is kind of a philosophy that potentially founded like everything: astrology, science, mathematics, medicine, and through this dialogue eventually providing us all with tools to be able to potentially manipulate your reality, like to whatever you want, whether it's branding or marketing, or you're just literally your character, the mask that you put on every day, who you want to become, and
the story that you tell yourself.
The story that you tell yourself, the experience inside of your own mind, because all is mind, as they say.
To identify where you're operating from. And honestly, to take responsibility for yourself so that there's no room for self-victimization.
Right. To give a sense of empowerment in your reality fabrication, your crafting of it as an artist would. You know, it's like there's some freedom in this expression, and you can choose from so many different archetypes and colors. So with that said, I think we gave people enough time to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to be recapping what we spoke about during the last Instagram live, and then we're going to be going into the 7 archetypes as told through story and characters, and delving pretty deep into the 12 steps of the hero's journey. So just be patient with us. It's going to be a lot of information, and you have any questions, please ask on the feed, because we're also watching on the feed.
Yeah.
We learned from last time.
Yeah, we want it to be like a back and forth dialogue between y'all and us. So, yeah. So to kind of dial it in where we were last, we were talking about basically the Philosopher's Stone, which is a fractal. It's a symbol, right? So you have the circle, you got the triangle, and you got the square, and they just kind of repeat each other, right? So we're starting with the circle, which is the prima materia, the one thing, which is the story itself, right? Mm-hmm. And Kaylin, you can take it to the next.
Yeah, so it's the one mind or the one story, and it's the outer circle that encompasses everything, but also the inner circle. And that corresponds to the basic conflict of your story, but also the inner circle corresponds to the resolution of that conflict and your story coming to conclusion, which gives birth to the 2.
Mm-hmm. And those 2 almost atomic forces, or, you know, if you think of an atom, it has its positive and negative poles. So it's kind of, or the 2 dragons chasing each other. And then as soon as they split, it creates those 3. And
well, as the protagonist and the antagonist, the protagonist being the masculine principle and the antagonist being the feminine principle.
And one is kind of moving out, one's moving in, or they're kind of like chasing each other, like Tom and Jerry, infinitely. But as soon as they split, that one thing becomes the observer. And so then that creates the three, the soul, the mind, and the body, which would then be...
So the character, to review, the character, which is the perceiver, corresponds to the sulfur principle. The plot, which is the perception, corresponds to the mercury principle. And the setting, which is what is being perceived, corresponds to the salt principle.
Mm-hmm. And then those three, and their multiple combinations, would then create the four, which are the elements. And you got it, the fire, air, water, and earth. And fire, fire is the introduction of the story. And then air is the, am I getting it right? Mm-hmm. Oh, air is the rising. The climax is the water. And then the falling is the earth. So those four elemental energies, just thinking about the qualities of each of those, would then technically correspond to the elements of a story or the sequence of, because like a story, it requires some sort of change from beginning, middle, and end. And there is something within the psyche that it's embedded in our psyche. So then it just feels familiar and appealing to abide by these archetypal rules of storytelling.
And if you're paying attention.
Yeah. If you're paying attention, you can observe it in everything. Like every movie, every film, every book, church, the Bible, it's like following these same story elements. So after the four, we get those into seven, which are our performers, our players.
Our actors.
Our actors.
So this is the actors previous to them becoming characters. So the characters are really the masks, which would be the 12, but the actors are the fundamental archetypes.
Our primary colors of the expression of the character. And so then that would be, we could start with Saturn. So,
well, how about you give your disclaimer about how this really works in reality?
Which part?
The part where things don't fit neatly in boxes.
Oh, yeah.
And Hermes, the guy that's behind all of it, wearing all the masks.
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting because when we're talking about the seven archetypes, we're talking about the seven metals, we're talking about the seven planets. So I'll touch into the metals real quick. We'll talk about this thing in the course, but there is something that's happening on Earth, inside of the center of the Earth, that where not just our sun, but other stars as well, but we'll just keep it in our neighborhood. Our sun is emitting certain, it's radiating certain energies, and these energies get to the core of our Earth, and the core of our Earth is speculated to be like a furnace, if you will, and when these energies or these frequencies get to the core of our Earth, they start to become different metals as they rise up, and that's how we get the notion of the seven archetypes. So it's really cool to understand the metals because you have lead. Lead then is just this one archetype, so you can put them in a box for the most part. You can put copper into a box for the most part, and define these things, because there has to be a definition to these archetypes so that the mind can actually have ingredients to work with, or structure, and hence the word structure. And we're always going to start with Saturn, which is your foundation, your root. But with that said, it gets really interesting. I've been emphasizing with these guys for a while now, that when you go from the mineral metallic realm, which is the most fixed, you then move up to the vegetable realm, which is right in the middle between fixed and volatile. And then you get into the animal realm, which is the most volatile. When we talk about the mineral metallic realm, we'll just stick to the metals. When we talk about the metals, it's very easy to just put them in a box to understand your foundational ingredients to reality. When you start to move into the vegetable realm, you start to know, all right, so for example, I take lead, I put it through a process, and then I'll get the volatile oil of lead, or the essential oil of lead. The molecules inside of the volatile oil of lead, or Saturn. And the compounds that are inside of that oil of lead are correspondent. They do things to the body that are correspondent to Saturn, or lead. And, again, we're talking about lead, but you can apply that to all the other 6 metals. And it's a really good starting point. When you get to the plants, you start to have an array of compounds in a plant's essential oil. So a plant, it gets harder to put it into a box, because a plant's essential oil structure doesn't just have one thing. That's why a plant doesn't just do one thing. A plant can have several medicinal benefits to it, or attributes or correspondences. So you can look at a plant, like juniper, for example. Well, first of all, there are a variety of species of juniper. So each one has more correspondences of a certain planet than others. And not just that, but also the parts of the plant itself will express different planetary aspects to it. So the berries are going to offer and express correspondences to a particular planet. And even then, when you zoom in more, there are aspects of those berries of juniper that may be more, they may be more lunar, or they may be more mercurial or something. And then the leaves of juniper are going to express a different aspect of a planet. And then the bark is going to express something else. And so is the heartwood of juniper going to express something different from another planet. And even then, the heartwood or the bark or the berries or the leaves will still express at least 2 different types of planets to it. So I'm expressing all of this because it does get a little more in depth. It gets more complex. And I don't mean that like it gets more difficult. It's just it gets more entertaining and more, you got to get more involved to actually be open-minded, to understand that our world is not linear. So there's dimensions and facets to everything. And it's important to note that, and I keep sharing this with them and everyone that I interact with about this, because it's, for now, it's really easy to start somewhere. It's like, oh, I'm experiencing, in my life or in a circumstance, a situation with myself and or another, the perceived other, something very Saturnian or something very Venusian, something very Martian, right? And that's a really good starting point. So these are training wheels, if you will. But don't stop there, because it actually is much more in depth than that. Because in a situation with yourself or someone, you will find that it's not just one archetype that you're engaging with. And I share that as well, because at the end of the day, there are no archetypes. There are no 7 days. There is no structure to anything. There is no story. It just is this thing. We'll call it the thing. But the thing needs to it's just an innate aspect of this thing to experience itself or I self somehow. So it creates this illusion, and we're talking about Hermes here. We're talking about Mercury, the thing that's imagining everything right now. So it's like a borderline schizophrenic, delusional thing that's happening with this thing, so that it believes that it is something other. So it must forget itself. But before it did, Hermes, Mercury he's the god of alchemy. He's the one it's the one that created all of alchemy. And alchemy is basically this blueprint to understand the architecture of reality. And it left that there so that eventually it's going to forget, because that's the whole point of the game, is to be able to forget. Because if you can forget, then you will believe it. If you believe it, then you'll give into it. If you give into it, you'll play the fucking game that you designed for yourself. But eventually the snake stops eating its tail. Will eventually have eaten its tail entirely. And once it devours its own head, remembers the thing, the Godhead remembers the thing, or Christ consciousness, or the Buddha, or the Philosopher's Stone. It's not this magical thing. It's literally you just remember that you're not you, and blah, blah, blah. But let's bring it back real quick to Mercury, Hermes. There are no archetypes but it creates this illusion and believes it. So a delusion of that there are these other aspects that had already designed it before it forgot, right? So each archetype, as you study it, as you ingrain yourself into it, as you delve into this thing, this archetype, this specific archetype, you will come across a boundary. You will come across an edge, which, interestingly enough, Hermes is the god of edges. It's an edge god. It's the god of boundaries. Because eventually, you'll talk about Saturn, and you'll realize that you get to know all these things about Saturn, how Saturn operates, but that is one side of it, of Saturn. Then to really fully understand Saturn, you have to look at the other side of the coin, and that's where you start to meet these edges, because that other side of the coin is going to lead you to Jupiter or another archetype, another planet. So we were talking about this before. So Jupiter is the sage, right? He's the wise sage. He's the one.
Can I just say it in a different way to recap?
Yeah.
So another way that you can phrase this is that what we're teaching today is going to be very linear. What we're sharing today is going to be very linear.
Not teachers.
And that, yes, we are explaining specific archetypes, but that they actually transform from one into another. So in everyday reality, you can express multiple archetypes at one time. It's not always so clear and cut dry, and you can't exactly put like your everyday waking existence into a box, like a spreadsheet. It just doesn't work like that. So we're going to give you the fundamentals of what these archetypes are, but just keep in mind that when it comes to applying it to your story in everyday reality, that the archetypes transform from one into another and change throughout the hero's journey.
Change is inherent to, I think, storytelling. Like, I think I was mentioning this before, as the performer, you need attention, you need a change from the beginning, middle, and end of the story. So those atomic forces, I think, then just recreate in these little microcosms within the character. So most good characters, in my view, they tend to be at least two, if not multiple of the seven at various points in their journey. Or it's like when you take two oppositional qualities and you bring it into one, it creates what they call irony, which is compelling. It's like this person who is an average Joe is actually a genius, or like, you know, this guy who's a intense warrior is really into cats. You know, it's like you get these like opposite qualities into one, which makes a really good, fun story, I think. And one more thing is I was going to say is like between the three, there's three realms in the alchemical world, right? And they have different spectrums of densities. So he was getting into the metallics, which are probably the most dense because they are crystalline structure. So a metal is made of it's an atom, or it's an element. So it's like the repeating same molecule throughout. Whereas a plant is just a little more complex, but then we're getting into animals or humans, our human performance of the archetypes within TV, film. And so it's going to be the most complex, right?
So in the comments there, it says, you can be sun, moon, and rising, and they all interact. And I think that's a perfect example because you're simultaneously all those things, but using this archetypal structure and the correspondences with the Philosopher's Stone, the 1, 3, 4, 7, and 12, they're really kind of just guidelines. So with that being said, we can get into it.
So real quick, because someone just asked, so is finding the Philosopher's Stone essentially just experiencing ego death? I just wanted to touch on that real quick. Anyone looking for the Philosopher's Stone is never going to find it. It finds you if it's your time to be found, if you will. But the idea, there's actually several things in that question. I mean, like, what is ego? Honestly, like, what is that? I don't think it fucking matters, right? Because it's already all mind. So if it's all mind, why would the mind be any lesser or more than itself if it already is mind? So I personally get rid of the word ego, right? I can maybe at best I'll say the mind is in a state of, it's in an egoic state where it's so caught up in the game that it fucking forgets, and it just keeps thinking like me, but it doesn't matter.
Or the future, or the past, or what people think about you. I think there
The
are
story that you tell yourself.
Alchemically speaking, we're talking about purification, right? So you can take the archetype and exalt it, but it has a shadow at all points, but the shadow is not wrong, right?
Right, and I think that when people talk about things like the ego, they're just referring to the shadow, and the shadow also does not actually exist. They are latent aspects of yourself, whether you want to appreciate them or acknowledge them or embrace them or not, that are there for some weird reason. We'll go back to astrology for a second, right? And they say that before you came here, something, fate, destiny, something was written that you were going to come here with, and it was also written that you were going to encounter certain things. So you may have been born with a disease or dis-ease, or encounter dis-eases as you come in through this world and just live through this world. But we can call those things shadow aspects or shadows or demons or whatever the fuck. So in the process of self-individuation from the world, you isolate yourself with yourself, however the fuck that looks, but you isolate yourself with yourself, meaning that you separate yourself from the world to get to understand and get to know yourself, build a relationship with yourself, which is terrifying, and it's not comfortable, and it's fucking, like, it's scary as fuck. And it's like, it's dangerous, but it's dangerous because the mind wants to continue to grab on to reality for something. But the process of self-individuation, there are several things in a laboratory that you can do in which you're putting yourself, or the thing that you're working with, through fire, because fire always burns everything down that's not factual, right? So this thing with the shadow, you embrace your shadow, and when you do, I'll share from my experience, embracing the shadow is uncomfortable during the process, but as soon as the shadow is embraced, I'm laughing at myself because there was never a fucking shadow to begin with. They were just things that were just lingering around, old programs that were lingering around that were waiting for me to acknowledge them. If I don't acknowledge them, they're just back there. They don't just throw tantrums. They actually, somehow they insist on manipulating and affecting your reality. So it's like, I should be here or there doing XYZ, but for some weird reason, this thing keeps coming up. It's like, yeah, because you probably are trying to cast the demon or cast the shadow or cast the ego or whatever, like killing the ego or destroying the ego. It's like, you can't fucking destroy it, because it's actually the idea that it's you. Because if you think, you speak, you feel, you have stories on it, that's the mind anyways, or the thing that people call the ego. So I share all that because you wind up embracing yourself. This is the thing with the Philosopher's Stone. You don't need to, if it's meant for you to confect it, or it finds you, it's because you remember that you just remember the thing. That's the full complete awareness of the thing that you forgot. And it may seem like, yeah, I did it. That's what I wanted. It's like, yeah, now you know how it all works. Now you remember. So how much longer are you going to really stay here? I mean, the alchemists that made Philosopher's Stones, I mean, maybe Saint Germain, because he was probably having a lot of fun. But most alchemists, they don't do the immortality thing and just fucking stay here, because it's like, oh, I get it. I get the whole thing. I'm out of here. Because as soon as I'm out of here, I could just do it all over again and forget again, because you just can.
Quick question, Raven. How can you use the archetypes to help guide you through that experience?
So I would say, since I never had guides, at some point I gave up on looking for a guide. So there was no guidance. It is guidance, right? But basically I allowed myself the time and space to want to understand reality from a context and from a perspective that wasn't common. So I couldn't Google it up. No one was sharing it with me. But once I started to understand these archetypes, I started with Jungian psychoanalytics, right? He's the one that wrote the books and the words. Basically, he structured the archetypes more and the collective unconsciousness and the unconscious and the conscious and all this stuff. So what happened was, as I started to gain this data, I was accruing words, vocabulary words that allowed me to have some sort of footing in this insanely ungrounded, unstructured realm that I was realizing that I lived in. So it actually started aiding me to understand, oh, the more I understand these archetypes, the more I understand these metals. The archetypes from the Jungian perspective allowed me to have more context to the metals that I was working with in the lab. But also working with the metals in the lab started giving me more context to the archetypes from the Jungian psychoanalytics. And both of those started giving me more context to when people talk about hermetics. Also, all those three started giving me more context to when people start to talk to me about magic or high magic, or when I can go back into my family, my blood family in this reality, I can go into the Catholicism and see the archetypes at play still. I can go into the Santeria stuff and I understand the archetypes there. It's like, this is a repetitive pattern. Like this thing, there are different flavors and ways in which it expresses itself, but the thing, I can't, it's not new to me. Just how it's being performed is new to me. So I was like, wait a minute.
It gives your mind context.
So I still, which is to me, I am so fucking grateful that I understand these archetypes and I'm still learning. But I understand these archetypes and I'm not fucking bored. I'm so glad, because when these archetypes interact with each other, it's not just one and two and then that's it. Sometimes you're interacting with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, or sometimes you're interacting with all 7 archetypes in one scenario. It could be with another person, with yourself, whatever. But then all 7, each one is coming into this game, into the situation, the scenario, in different degrees or different amounts. Just like if you had 7 ingredients to make a dinner, to cook a meal, those 7 ingredients, you could come up with a multitude of different meals, because if you use only a gram of one ingredient, 30 grams of each of the other ones, you see what I'm saying? Like, you start to fuck around with the ratios. It's amazing. And I don't even know if there is a limitation to the different expressions or different performances that you can interact with. Same thing with my reality too. That's why, back to the thing that I was talking about, that the archetypes, eventually you come to an edge, to a boundary of that archetype itself as, all right, I've gotten really fucking good at Saturn. I've gotten really good at Saturn. And then you get to this edge point with Saturn where, well, Saturn has to learn something. Saturn has to exalt, because if Saturn is your foundation, which you build upon, and you start life with building shitty foundations, that's not a judgment, I'm just being facetious here, but you start off with building shitty foundations because you built them unconsciously, and you have built structures on top of these shitty foundations, things will crumble. Okay, but does that mean that that's Saturn? No, that is an aspect of Saturn. So eventually Saturn, its shadow, becomes a foundation in which you are certain, you know, this is what I want to build upon. So this is the foundation in which I'm building consciously, intuitively. I speak it. This is what I want. This is how it's going to be. And even then, you don't attach yourself, because it may not have been what you thought it was anyways, right? Be careful what you wish for. But where does that knowledge come from? Like, does Saturn figure that out on its own, that this isn't working? Saturn is constrictive. It's fixed. It's heavy. It's very constrictive. You look at a cube of galena, fucking beautiful, right? Shiny, sort of, but it's compressed. And you only need a small amount of lead or galena. Galena is a lead ore, but you can hold a very small amount of galena and notice how fucking heavy it is. It's just compressing into itself, right? Okay, so then something that's like that is very rigid. It's very set in its ways. It does not reflect light properly. When lead is used to make lead glass, like lead crystal glass, Lead is the only thing that will take light and actually change it. It won't even fucking reflect it like the other metals can when it turns to glass. So then that means that these natural characteristics of lead and Saturn, you should never be able to build a foundation that actually works in your behalf. But you can do that. So how the fuck does that happen? Because Saturn, you start to realize that you hit that edge, you hit that boundary, and lead starts to have to learn from other archetypes. For example, lead, or Saturn, Kronos, is the father to Jupiter, Zeus. That's his dad, right? So Jupiter, Zeus is Saturn, Kronos' father, right? Saturn had gone through like a really shitty relationship with his parents and like his dad, and like his dad would just kill everybody. Saturn's mom was like, no, I'm hiding you, all right? So, bam. Saturn was like, my father, what an asshole, but it's okay, I'm just gonna do my own thing, all right? No daddy issues, just I'm gonna do my own thing. Cool. But then Saturn developed something from his father where it's like, I need to eat my children, which is eating your ignorance, destroying your ignorance, destroying your child, blah, blah, blahs, right? Your incompetence and so on. And then he has a child, Saturn, Kronos has a child, which is Jupiter, Zeus. Okay. Well, he keeps eating all his children, and then Jupiter's mother, Zeus's mother, is like, I can't, it's a repetition, right? I can't let my baby get eaten, so she hides him somewhere too. And then Jupiter grows up, and he's like, daddy issues, level 100. He's like, no, I must avenge my father. So what happens to Jupiter? Jupiter becomes the antagonist or the antithesis of Saturn. So what happens, but here's the thing. The reason I'm getting into all this is because eventually it's Jupiter, who's the sage. He's the wise teacher. He's the wise one, right? But Jupiter is expansive. He's literally retaliating like a teenage girl or boy, whatever. He's retaliating against the father. So he's going to do everything that's the opposite. So Saturn is constricting, right? Heavy, solid foundation. Jupiter is the opposite. Jupiter is the one that becomes a drug addict. He gets diabetes because he indulges in Twinkies and shit like that. Hold on. We knew it was going to take a minute. So I've been very quiet throughout these videos. But anyway, so Jupiter goes through this process and he just basically wants to destroy his father. Either directly or indirectly, like in his head. But back to the edge, the boundary of Saturn, for example. Eventually, Saturn becomes a foundation that you can trust and build upon. Something that is certain and you can rely on. But how does that happen if Saturn is so constrictive and not incapable, it just refuses to change? Is because Saturn and Jupiter are actually, they don't really exist, but for the sake of story, Saturn has to learn something from Jupiter. Jupiter has to learn something from Saturn. Now, I won't get into that one, but Saturn eventually learns to expand a bit. That motherfucker learns to like, all right, look, you don't have to do everything that's happening. You don't have to be like everybody, but can you have a little wiggle room? Like, you don't have to change completely, but maybe give, you fucking curmudgeon, maybe give this thing a shot. Like, maybe just like, okay, I don't want to change, but I wonder if I expand my horizons, my perspective, my ideas, my thoughts, my beliefs and stuff, if I could just expand it just a little bit, maybe I can build stronger, more authentic, more honest, more resilient foundations that I can build structures upon. That's it.
I think that was honestly a great explanation of the relationships, like how one relationship between the archetypes can be explained. Mm-hmm. But we kind of need to go back to the archetypes themselves before we get into the relationships of the archetypes amongst each other to lay the foundation.
Yeah.
Right?
There is a tendency for them to have counterparts. Like, we could just, like,
yeah,
brush on that really quick. Like, there's Jupiter and Saturn, the kind of perfect polarities, Mars and Venus. the moon and the sun.
And Mercury.
And then Mercury floating around all over the place.
Going up
like
and
right
down.
in the middle. Yeah, totally.
All right, so then you guys start. I'm gonna go get more
Positive,
wine.
negative poles. There's no more.
There's no more wine. I'm gonna get water. So you guys start,
Okay.
and I'll just
So-
interject and chime in. And
No, I mean, let's flow with it. But yeah,
All right, so what we're gonna do is explain the archetype, the role that it plays, its action, and what it expresses as a virtue, and then give a couple examples. So if you guys have questions or if you want to contribute, please
Like
feel free to do
examples.
that.
Yeah.
It'll make the conversation quite robust. So naturally, we'll begin with Saturn.
Yeah, lead. The base of the spine, the root. Papa, daddy time. But also, I mean, I think sometimes it's easy to get caught up in these archetypal, gendered expressions of them, and they kind of tend to transcend if you pay attention. And one of my favorite. Oh, yeah.
So Saturn role is the server
Server.
on behalf of humanity or others. Its action is to help, and its virtue is security. So
It's the bones, it's the color red, it's the element earth. And we were just talking about some examples in lore, and I really dug the Sandman series, this is the comic book, but then they also made a show on Netflix. And I appreciate how they depicted the Sandman's sister, Death, which is, to me, the most Saturnian depiction I've ever seen. But in this way that was not, she's not a skeleton, she doesn't have a hood or a scythe, she's walking around barefoot, she had glowing, beautiful skin, she's eating apples, grounding into the earth, and the people around her, the humans, they're just smiling, they're gravitating towards her, and she just, in the story, she describes feeling upset that she has to watch people die for eternity, and then eventually coming to this acceptance, this sense of peace. And that's so Saturn. It's being at service. It's being at service before yourself, even when it's deeply unsettling and uncomfortable. And the process of death being, in a weird way, life-giving. It provides something that is so deeply nourishing, which is, I think,
nutritive.
It's this green, earthy thing. It's not all black and heavy metal. It's sometimes it's kind of sweet, and
Yeah, I think that another great example of this is Samwise Gamgee in the Lord of the Rings series. So he's there along Frodo's entire journey, and pretty much Frodo can't make it to destroy the ring without Sam. Sam is the one that carries all the pots and pans, that cooks all their food, and he pushes him when Frodo loses faith or gets lost. And he even gets to the point where he pretty much almost dies trying to save a box of salt that he's carried from the Shire. So in the way, it's very, he's serving Frodo in a way, and all the rest of Middle Earth by doing that. And just the metaphor of the salt and almost wanting to die for the salt, I think is super Saturnian.
yeah, totally. I'm looking at some people's examples.
Making them potatoes.
And someone mentioned Joe Black as another example. Are you familiar with that reference?
I'm not familiar with that reference.
Hey Raven, do you know Joe Black?
Is that a gorilla movie?
I don't know.
A monkey?
Well, we'll look it up. We'll definitely add that as an example.
But as Raven explained, these archetypes have relationships. So Jupiter is really next on the list and is going up through the chakras.
The sacral chakra, the sexual center, the pleasure center, the water element in some ways.
Do you guys know which planet corresponds to each chakra?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the sacral.
Oh.
We're talking about Jupiter. We went from Saturn, led the bone system up to.
So Jupiter is the sage.
Mm-hmm.
So his role as a sage,
To
his
teach.
action is to teach, and his virtue is creativity. And there's a differentiation here between Jupiter and Mercury, because Jupiter is the energy of expansion in all things, and he is the wisdom of moral code, ethics, honesty, and higher learning. So he's really more about like philosophical information and living a ethical life.
Ethics, morality, a sense of right and wrong. Like he's like that warm grandfather that would give you candy. You know, he's sweet. He wants to make you feel good. You know, he's really the examples we were using were Merlin or Gandalf or Dumbledore. It's like that older, wise figure. This is like maybe in an exalted form.
What's this chakra?
We're talking about the
sacral chakra.
Sacral chakra.
What's the sacral?
Jupiter.
Bam, chicka, wow, wow.
Wow, chicka, wow, wow.
Bound to go out. But yes, like it's kind of like it's moving out, it's expanding out. So there is a sense of intellectual pursuit and creativity. And I think there's the many shadows to that, which are addiction or
Excessive consumption.
Yeah,
I
maybe
would
called
say
the
is
gambler or this
his
like
shadow self.
like
Like
guys gambling.
gluttony.
Yeah, like over consuming for sure.
The other example we have is Obi-Wan Kenobi. So he is really the one that teaches Luke about the ways of the Force and how to live in a higher state of being and to become a Jedi Knight. And you see throughout Star Wars that he does have jovial qualities, and he's not so serious like Saturn, that when he is teaching Anakin, he has like a playful personality about him.
Yeah, he's delightful. And I think we were reflecting on this, that there's something about the moral code that is embedded in the heart. And I know we're like maybe skipping chakras, but this is where they kind of fuse multiple aspects. It's over time, the ability to empathize with the other allows you to, it's like almost like a level of devotion or allowing yourself to nourish the other. But I do think there's so many sides to Jupiter. He's kind of hard to pin down because it's oriented in pleasure, and there is a pleasure to giving, but there's pleasure in taking what you want, so.
And again, that's where it's like important to learn the archetypes as individuals, so that when it comes to relationships and the essence or an energy that you have in a relationship, you can like really identify what is interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I love Brad Pitt.
I know, now I'm remembering the movie. Yes. He was a great death. Very, very beautiful. Okay, so moving up the chakra system up to Mars, the stomach, which is the solar plexus, fire, and the warrior, yang, that outward moving thing.
Passion.
The warrior is the role. His action is to achieve, and his virtue is will. So we have a very like traditional example of this, and it's the gladiator, pretty much like cut and dry from the Mars archetype. We also have Han Solo, who originally joins the fight for money, but then is called to duty and ends up joining the cause for the fight.
And I also I had this example, I don't know if any of you watched the Predator movies, where there was one from the perspective of, do you remember what tribe they were?
Oh, it was the last Predator film on Netflix.
Yeah.
Freaking amazing. But
well, taking in place like really, really early on with this, indigenous tribe in the Americas. And then this young woman encounters a predator, like this extraterrestrial, and the whole movie is her hero's journey, learning how to destroy it. Yeah.
Prey, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's going through the hero's journey
It was so
through
good.
the warrior journey to itself, right? You already know the story. It's like, oh, she's a girl, and she can't do it, right? And her brother is a warrior, and everybody's a
Yeah,
warrior.
her whole
and she's
tribe
just like-
doesn't want to accept her as a warrior, but
right, and then this like intergalactic
like
predator
impossible
finds her
predator.
and is like, oh, this bitch is actually fucking worth.
I
Like,
know.
she's fucking strong as
The
fuck.
predator's the only
He
one
doesn't
that
fuck with her.
sees how
Yeah.
awesome she is at being
Yeah.
a warrior. Yeah, and then she just gets
On Hulu. All
Yeah,
right, we're gonna
so
stop
good.
promoting. In
Yes.
the future, we'll get paid for this. But anyway,
observant. Yes, totally. I think that is the intelligence of Mars, the warrior or the hunter archetype.
Yeah.
It's
And like when to know
the
when to
martial
act.
artist. Yeah, being
Mhm.
able to see what's going on.
and it's thank you, Lisa. She was very observant. Observation is interesting because I mean we could even talk about Jupiter for a second, right? Like Jupiter becoming the wise sage. Jupiter doesn't shut the fuck up. You talk to Jupiter, he just talks over you. He interrupts you to tell you everything every fucking little thing like a child. Just like, no, but I got this other idea. Oh my God. So
Girls just wanna
that's
have
not a
fun.
sage, right? And that's not and I'm not, we're not judging any of this. We're just looking at it through observation and articulating it. So Jupiter does not have, he's not capable at the moment in his development to become the sage because he continues to expand, right? Project, like impose himself into everything. That's not a teacher. That's not a sage. But eventually, we won't get into it. But eventually, that archetype becomes the sage. How does that happen? Well, one of the ways that happens is that it becomes observant and to be able to be observant, not analyze. Not project, but actually observe. So in order to observe, you cannot project, you cannot insinuate, you cannot assume, you cannot have a prerogative, you can't have an objective. All you're doing simply is becoming that thing which does not speak or think, only collects everything that's going on without judgment or anything like that. It has to listen. In order for you to be able to teach, you need to be able to listen. Because if you are truly a teacher, then you truly are a student. A student knows how to listen. A true teacher knows how to listen, to extrapolate data, to allow data. Also, now we're going to talk about Venus for a second. Venus is one of Venus's aspects, exalted, is that she is the receiver. See what I'm saying? This is fuck yeah. She's able, she goes through her own shit and she can then become the womb, right? To receive things without judgment, without care, want, or anything like that. So Jupiter learns how to, by his interaction with his own internalized archetypal Venus or heart, which is, the thing with love, that feminine, the mother, which is like, I'm going to take this in. Because I don't have anything to lose or give. I just want to take that data in. So he learns to shut the fuck up and actually stop projecting. This is Jupiter, right? He puts his dick away for a second and he's just like, Because that's his Venus, right? Because all the archetypes have each other inside of them anyway. He starts to listen. He starts to allow the universe to gift data and he receives. And once he receives, he can sit with that. It's like you took 5 grams of mushrooms. You have to go through an integration period. You have to integrate that shit. You're not going to integrate. If you've done like fucking 50 ayahuasca rituals, you have not integrated the first one. If you've done 50 of them, because you're still doing that Jupiter thing. More and more and more. Give me more data, which is also the shadow of Mercury as well. Just more and more and more and more and more. You're just like jacking off to the data.
Well, as someone, I'm a Pisces. My birthday's next week.
She identifies.
I identify as my story. I ruled by Jupiter, so I got like a soft spot, but I feel like I'm still understanding him. But that is the motivating force. Desire is the motivating force that causes everything to happen. Nothing would happen if you didn't like want to move out.
Right, but there's a desire to move out, but also...
Oh, no, mature it. Exalt that.
Can there be a desire to shut the fuck up and take it in for a
But
second?
that's the
100%.
Saturnian,
100%.
the relationship with Saturn is the boundary.
Yeah, if they can integrate, But I think if we were talking about these exalted forms of Jupiter, like Wolf of Wall Street, I think that's a good example.
That's my new album name, Jacking Off to the Data.
Jacking off to the data.
I'm blushing because I know that story all too well. But anyway. But yeah, this is the thing that we're expressing is that
immature version.
within each archetype you find the other archetypes. And in alchemy, there's an alchemical process that I did before, and it took a long time, but I took lead ore, galena, and basically I put it through several processes where I got rid of other things. You can call it distractions because I'm aiming for a particular thing within lead. So I took about 9 pounds of lead, and I was left, by the time I finished this process, I'm not going to get into it, not even in the course, but by the time I was done, I had about 10 milligrams of gold. I didn't turn lead into gold. Science knows this, metallurgists know this, physicists know this. Within gold ore, or within lead ore, there's actually fragments of gold. The thing led to gold, and that everything, the journey and the story in between, lead already has the thing within it. But you also get other metals when you're extracting, one of them being copper, anyway, but the point is that every single archetype contains, at the meta level, it contains all the other archetypes too.
Literally, like lead is becoming gold and gold is becoming lead.
Yeah, and really it's like, is it really becoming, or is it just realizing? It's like, oh my God, I'm all dark. I know this for myself. I always thought I'm just dark as Saturnian. I'm just going to be like a curmudgeon and stuff like that, but I'm also very mercurial. So I was like, okay, cool.
Then you're over there talking to the plants.
Oh. Yeah.
But now we're moving up to the heart.
Yes.
Venus.
Again, talking to the plants.
Venus.
Exactly. Green.
You know what's interesting, by the way, real quick? So Mars rules the blood, right? Red, rich in copper or iron, but Venus, like veins, like Venus, right? Having to do with your veins. It's interesting the love relationship, or the strange love relationship between Venus and Mars, right? So Venus is the portal, the carrier. The veins hold that blood, which is Mars, right?
Interesting. She contains him.
Well, no, not contains. She allows passage for him to actually do something.
They
with
work
structure.
Together.
Yeah, instead of, we were talking about this before, and it's one of my favorite archetypal analogies, which is Mars. There's a beautiful painting. There's probably like 8 Instagram lives where I touch into this for a second. Mars is the god of war, right? So he destroys, he protects, and defends, right? What allows Mars to even feel that is passion. So when you feel strongly about something, when you really want to do something, it doesn't need to be violent. The point is that when you really feel passionate about something, like me, people sometimes think that I'm mad, that I'm yelling or arguing, and it's not. My Mars, because it's also will, right? So I will express the fact that I'm super fucking stoked about this.
Yes.
That's
excitement.
Mars, right?
Yeah.
So Mars protects, not just attacks, protects, right? So like if you're angry about something or offended, Mars shows up with his armor and his shield and his sword, and he's like, no one will fucking harm what?
He's so
dramatic. There's something more vulnerable. There's something more susceptible to harm or whatever, right? So when you're angry, you're not actually angry. Anger is a symptom. It's actually showing you that there's something else going on. So you're not an angry person. You have a Mars that is ready to defend one or many things inside of you that need to be acknowledged, because those things are vulnerable, they're soft, they're supple, like a child, if you will, right? So Mars has this habit, and is innate in him, to protect internalized childhood aspects of you, or child-ish aspects, or child aspects of yourself, right? So that's Mars when he's angry, that's what you're interacting with, right? Cool. Fire, passion, right? Awesome. That's just what he does. He's the god of fucking war. No, even in the Greek and the Roman mythos, the gods don't actually like Mars. They don't like Ares. They don't really want to fuck with him because he's kind of like annoying. It's like, you're like this little runt that just keeps fucking fucking shit up. You just keep breaking shit. Like, we can't even talk to you. These are the guys who are all full of shit themselves, right? Even their shadow, they're like, nah, fuck that guy, dude. Like, we can't fuck with him. He's just like, ugh, right? But here's the crazy thing.
But he's protecting what he loves.
Venus. Well, he's protected when he's been told, because he's like a dog. He's like a guard dog. Like, you protect this. The dog's like, can we talk about this philosophically for a second? Like, that's not Mars, right? That's like Jupiter or whoever.
It's like responding or reacting.
That's your job. That's my job. It's like your
Yeah.
immune system, right? Your immune system isn't like, I don't know what that is. Can we talk about this for a second? Your immune system is like, I don't know you. I gotta attack you. White blood cells, T cells, everybody that's doing this fucking thing, right? And that's why viruses are mercurial, but that's a different story. So now that we know this about Mars, that aspect of Mars, and the gods don't even fucking like them, enter into this story Venus, Aphrodite. So there is an archetypal story of Venus and Mars in which Mars surrenders to Venus. So there is a Botticelli painting where Venus's little, ergoic. Anyways, they have to do with Eros, right? Like one of Venus's children, Eros, love, heart, passion, or whatever. So she enters the scene with Mars, and Mars submits. He surrenders. He surrenders to her, and her little cherubs is removing the leather ties in his armament. He drops his sword. He puts his shield down, and it's not because she's hot and manipulating him through her old shadow. She's exalted that, and that's another story. He trusts her. This strong, fiery masculine that can't be fucking stopped from running, just going ape shit and Kerouac on everyone and everything, including the gods. This woman, this goddess, this archetype, Venus, Aphrodite, somehow gets Mars to chill the fuck out. But she doesn't try to do that, though. She doesn't have the goal of like, I gotta calm this motherfucker down and get that dick for me. Like, that would be her shadow. That's not what's going on at all. Her presence, just with her mere presence, Mars surrenders. Why is that? Aren't you supposed to be afraid of me because I'm Mars? You should be scared of me. You, of all the gods, should be afraid of me because you're a woman, right? Well, here's what happened. Venus, Aphrodite, Persephone, whoever you want to call, just got back, maybe not just, but just got back from a journey to the underworld. Anybody that goes to the journey of the underworld has seen the scariest, most terrifying shit ever. Things that we cannot even fucking talk about, not just because it's an Instagram platform, because it'll fuck you up, the type of shit that is down there, because the underworld is the unconscious. It's the dark net, the dark web.
The repressed part of your psyche, the part that wants to hurt people or laugh when they're hurt.
Or just the data itself. There's just some stuff.
The part of you that wants to like have inappropriate sexual thoughts. The part of you that like every dark aspect.
Well, I wouldn't even say once. I would be. I tread lightly with that because when you go into the underworld, it's not that you see things that you wanted that you don't want to admit. You just start to see things that are part of you, that's shadow stuff, right? So this
all that shit you
queen bitch just got back from that journey.
The stuff we hide, basically.
And she then encounters Mars. And when she encounters Mars, he already knows it. He's like, wait, aren't you supposed to be afraid of me? And she's like, you're the god of war. I've seen shit that would make you fucking piss your pants. You would be terrified if I told you just one piece of what the fuck I just saw. So, no, I'm not scared of you. He feels that and he fucking surrenders.
This is making me realize, though, like what you're describing, because it's a classic story in mythology and lore that, like Isis and Osiris, or Persephone and Hades, or even Mars and Venus, that she goes into the underworld, but that the shadow integration, which is such a buzzword, maybe overused at this point, but it occurs within the heart. Like you can't integrate with the self until you accept yourself as you are, even with everything like that is uncomfortable and disgusting or nasty or shameful. Like if you can actually just fully accept it without any resistance, you can no longer be harmed by yourself. That battle with the self and other, like there is no battle anymore. You can't fight unconditional love. And then I think there's once it's integrated, that you cannot make any mistakes. You can't fuck it up because you don't want anything anymore. You're just whole.
Right, but
then
we're talking about love in the heart.
Well, we're like moving up
about...
from Mars into the heart. I mean, they just are inextricably connected when we're going from shadow to exaltation.
Mm-hmm.
So just to plug in there real quick, Venus's role is the artisan. Her action is to create, and the virtue is understanding. And we just also want to point out that art is is being an expression of the heart.
Art and heart.
So,
art is in heart.
you know, the way that Venus approaches Mars is an art in order to get him to disarmor himself. And we have some really amazing examples of this, just to add some more story to the conversation. Personally, I think that the best example is Frida Kahlo's life. So everybody knows Frida Kahlo. Everybody knows that she was an amazing artist, but what they probably don't know is about her terrible fucking life. You know, she was disabled and still made art, and she had a husband who was a womanizer who actually cheated on her with her sister,
Jupiter,
and still continued to love him until the day that she died. And that is like true love and absolute complete understanding. And to go through all of that, you have to be like at one with truth. And she showed her journey in her art. And one of the last things that she painted before she died was herself as the world, as the Earth Mother, and of her holding her husband like a baby and saying, like, I forgive you, I understand you, and I see you, and I know what you've done, and I still choose to love you anyway.
That's love.
Like without conditions.
Love. Right.
I
love
mean,
never has conditions, so it's just love. Right?
Jesus in the heart and the what do you call it?
The
thorns in the heart.
cross and
Every
the fire
time
on
it
top.
beats,
Yeah.
it bleeds. It is utterly painful, but utterly you can't deny it. There's no fighting it. You can't resist it. Nothing can resist it, especially Mars.
Yeah. No
Yeah.
one can.
And funny, in the lab, Mars, plants and subjects, they bleed. Like it look like when they're being processed. Just as a little side note,
because they're pokey.
they make you bleed. Yeah, they have little pokers, but when you actually process them, they emit what looks like blood. There's a tendency for things that are associated with Mars. I just thought.
Yeah, even
fun.
making the oil of iron, I did not understand what the fuck was going on because I would get this. It would be so fast, right? Because he's got a short temper. I think he's very quick, right? So I would start to make this thing, and then all of a sudden I got these like blue, green, yellows showing up, and like all this like blood red sulfur or oil that would come out. But I didn't understand that I needed to actually, as soon as that happens, I don't give it a few weeks or months to do his thing, because he would start to
Fast.
oxidize.
Yeah.
He would start to oxidize, and then I got to deal with all this extra crap that was going on. It's like, man, you really are the most sensitive and emotional of all the fucking archetypes. You really fucking are the most, like, I thought you were just strong, but you're also like the little bitch of the fucking archetypes.
And this can be portrayed as the classical story of Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So
yeah.
if you think about that is the relationship between Venus and Mars.
It's the power of the
Maybe.
softness. No, you're not a beast.
No, like,
You're the
because in
beauty,
the story, it's
and
like,
I'm the beast.
And
he like wants to get close to her, but he's like, I think I like this bitch. I don't like her. Everybody get out. You
It's
hurt my
like
feelings.
Twilight,
Mars.
it's like he could hurt her, he could suck her blood, but he doesn't because
Oh, I never watched.
she's
And
so
then-
fragile.
Shadow
Vampires.
Venus is Poison Ivy from Batman.
Also, what was that movie with that one older lady actress. I think it was a Stephen King film where she slowly starts to poison like her son or some shit with like.
Are you talking?
Come on, guys! You guys know what I'm talking about.
Are you talking
Is
about
it
where
Misery?
he breaks his legs? I don't think it's her son.
No, but she's like poisoning this guy
Catherine Bates.
with yes.
Bates.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't
That's
know that it's her son.
that's one of the shadows of the mother archetype or like
I don't think it's
feminine.
actually the mother, but I understand what
Oh
you're
no,
saying.
I mean the feminine though, where it's just like, well, it comes from that mother thing, right? Even our reality right now, we call it the so anything that is a mother or the feminine, we call it Ma, M-A, right? Ma, like the goddess Ma'at, M-A apostrophe A-T,
Or Maya.
Ma'at, or Maya, or the matrix, or the matrix, the tricks.
Or materia.
That right. Wait, I just want a disclaimer. Materia artium is just material arts or the arts. So basically, I'm taking the mother or the material and I'm turning it into an art form. So I'm taking that bitch and I'm putting her through some crazy shit so then I can like artistically express it. But so the Ma'at thing, the matrix, the matrix, the tricks of the mother, the feminine, right? Mother Earth, the cradle of life. You're supposed to leave your mother's house. If you stay in the mother's house, it's because either A, you're a little punk and you haven't fucking figured out yet, maybe not this lifetime, but you will eventually, that you need to leave the mother's house, or the mother's shadow is being projected onto you, in which it starts to manipulate and coheres the child to stay. So I mentioned that thing, maybe the movie, I guess, Misery. The mother only knows how to be the mother. So if the mother only knows how to be the mother, and that's just an aspect of everything, right? But if the mother only knows how to be the mother, and then you take away the thing that is her child, then you take away the thing that she only knows that
her
she is here
identity,
to
her
be.
story. Like, if you identify with the story, then you are not emanating from truth, and then you become susceptible to distortion, where you're so attached to your story that you will protect it at all costs, even if it means harming anything else outside of you.
And no judgment, because she doesn't really mean to hurt the child. She's just in her own fucking realm, which is, I must keep my child here. And then she'll create delusional stories like, the world is dangerous, so I must I must keep the child here at home. The world is a wolf. There are wolves and predators out in the world and snakes, so I must keep the child home with me.
Into the woods.
Even though I'm poisoning my child with fucking
Rapunzel.
antifreeze. Keeping it up in the tower.
Literally, she's like, the world is full of wolves.
This is all making sense, right?
I think we
here,
nailed
right?
this one, guys.
Right. Cool.
So are we ready to move on to
the guy?
Good old Mercury.
Mercury.
Oh, lots of Mercury.
So we have his role as the scholar to consistently process information. His action is to explore, and the virtue is expression. And I've had a little help from my partner, Jess, who's a Lord of the Rings nerd. And this is kind of a deep cut, but once I explain this, I think you guys will see a lot of these characteristics in Raven and really understand the mercurial archetype. So,
me?
Yeah, you.
Who, me?
So it's a character called Tom Bombadil, who never really made it into the movies. It's a Lord of the Rings side character that is the watcher of the old forest and is older than the forest itself. Tom Bombadil warns the hobbits of ghosts and actually saves the hobbits when they're overcome by ghosts, which is a representative of Mercury's ability to go to the heavens and the underworld, to travel between realms. He speaks in rhymes and riddles, and one can sing to make him appear. Additionally, he's able to put on the ring with no effects, so the ring doesn't possess him, he doesn't become invisible or anything. And it also takes up 2 chapters of the book that seemingly are completely unrelated to the story at total. So he's essentially the quintessential storyteller of Lord of the Rings.
The storyteller,
Agree.
but the storyteller wrote himself into that character. This, what is his name?
Tom
Tolkien.
Bombadil.
Tolkien.
Well, I brought this up earlier. I was like, I wouldn't be surprised if Tolkien actually never existed. It's been Tom Bombadil this whole time, and he wrote the story about some guy named Tolkien who wrote the stories of. But just like any graffiti artist, they was like, oh, Raven was here. Tom Bombadil was like, I'm gonna have this creation called Tolkien write this whole massive realm of blah blah blah, but I'm gonna have him mention my name because why not?
Well,
I can.
People think, like, huge Lord of the Rings nerds think that Tolkien wrote himself into the story as Tom Bombadil, which is like such pure mercurial trickster shit. Like, it can't get any better than this.
More mercurial would be that Tom Bombadil, before his name was ever written as Tom Bombadil by Tolkien, Tom Bombadil wrote the story of a guy named Tolkien who wrote the story of Tom Bombadil in the Lord of the Rings series. That's the most trickster shit
infinite loop
ever.
of confusion, and also because
I
it's
like
like
it.
kind of,
But he also takes up 2 whole chapters
It's
of
like
the book
pointless.
that don't have anything to
Why?
do with the story.
Okay, why? Is that, I don't think that's Tolkien writing himself into the book as Tom Bombadil. I feel like it's a little more meta than that. It's Tom Bombadil operating from some etheric realm where Mercury's at. He's like, alright, I got this dude. I'm going to name him Tolkien. And I'm going to make him write about hobbits and shit. And then I'm going to make him go, oh, Stan Lee. Yes.
and then to go into other, because there's so many dimensions to Mercury, Hermes, but it's like the shadow. I would think of the Joker because I mean it's a clown, but it is what you don't think?
I don't know shit about the Mercury, so I don't know.
I don't know shit about
Oh my
Mercury.
I don't think there's a shadow to Mercury.
When
Because
the Joker,
Mercury is
fast
a
or
fool.
what?
No, because Mercury is a fool. And Mercury is a liquid. It's
but the Joker
it-
is playing the antagonist.
Well, that's
and-
one of the roles that he takes on. But I don't feel that Mercury has a shadow because Mercury is the only one in the story that is operating outside of the story while simultaneously working within the story just to
Right.
fuck with things.
If you're
But he's
outside of
also the fool. And liquid Mercury, if you drop a wad of it in your hand, it's a half sphere because it's on your hand. And it's reflecting everything around it. So if anything around that liquid mercury perceives a cunt hair of that as that's a shadow, that's you talking about your own reflection.
Well,
That's
yeah,
all your
I mean,
own shit. That's not Mercury.
Is that why you think that Mercury doesn't technically have like a partner in the archetype of the 7?
A partner?
Like-
no,
Well,
he's
because he
embedded in all of
reflects-
them.
he reflects
Because he's
everything.
Tom Bombadil. He wrote all the other archetypes. That's why Wednesday, right? So you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. 3 and 3, 33, magical number, right?
Yeah, Mercury
So
reflects.
it's him. He's the one that's creating all these other stories.
Maybe the Joker isn't the best example. I would say like maybe the Mask, because he puts on a mask and completely forgets, or doesn't forget, but decides to not take it off. Like he can't take it off.
Yeah. Well, there's this
you
thing about the
perform
Mercury.
so hard that you trick yourself that you're performing.
That's
right?
how I believe that I'm me and you guys are you and that this is all real, but really it's just a crazy fucking borderline schizophrenic delusion that I have for the sake of a fucking story, and I will end up in a psych ward because there are no psych wards because it's Tom Bombadil creating a fucking story all over again. I really
Right.
just like saying Tom Bombadil.
Tom
So-
Bombadil.
So, is the thing that Hermes forgot is the fact that he wrote the story?
That he was
He's-
performing in the first place.
Yeah. But yes, this is so fucking juicy. The thing that forgot will remember because before it forgot, it laid down certain constructs, certain things, alchemy. So that there's always like an eject button, like, oh, I remember now, bam.
It's
Because you don't want to do this thing
math.
for the infinities of infinities. It's like there's got to be an end because there was a beginning, so it's got to end so you can do it again in a new way or a different way, a different flavor. That's it. So, but again, it needs to forget in order to actually buy into it or believe it, and then just do it all over again because it can. So there's no right or wrong to reality. and I'm not gonna go there. But anyway, yeah.
Well, that's why
we'll get to that juicy stuff in the course.
Yes. I mean, that's why I was thinking of the Joker only as an example of someone who is challenging the idea of right and wrong because he realizes that nothing really matters if you say so.
And it's a necessary texture to a story, because the Joker showing up in a performance allows the potentiality of the story going in several directions, which creates suspense, which is really important too. I need to be, if I just know how this story is gonna go, why the fuck would I listen or read or watch the story? I need some element of suspense.
Surprise.
The element of surprise,
Which
yeah.
makes
It's
it makes a joke funny,
Yeah.
right? Because you don't know the punchline.
And the Joker is not there. People think that the Joker is the antagonist, but I would argue that it's not the antagonist. The antagonist is the protagonist's own fucking thought processes. The Joker is just there to show the protagonist an option. Just like, that's why Batman is treated a little bitch in the story, because he can't accept that he's actually he is the almost equivalent of the thing that he set out to be a vengeful god against. You know what I mean? It's like, really? Like, you chose to be the one that judges and goes, you're a bad guy. Spow. It's like, Joker shows up, he's like, I only exist because you made me. It's like, the fuck are you talking about? Yes, you're me. You're my daddy. It's a joke. It's a fucking trick. It's a trickster. It's a Joker. And it makes a lot of sense. But it's something that's between the unconscious and the conscious mind.
Right, which is connected to the moon. I mean, Quicksilver, right, is what he's called. It's like a connection between the mental forward aspect and the subtle shadow aspect. But, there was something else about that was so intriguing. The trickster.
Well, he's also the god of commerce and thief.
Yes,
So
thievery and money.
Another example would be the Robin Hood.
Like, that's literally what the Joker's about, showing Batman his reflection. Yeah. So is the Joker the antagonist? I guess you can say
but everyone's kind of rooting for him too, right? Like, we all kind of love the Joker.
Because he's in line with truth.
Right. But it's also like that. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. It's like the Jupiterian aspect that is expanding out towards knowledge is following some sort of moral code, whereas Mercury, Hermes is not, and yet is shamanically integrating the mind into cohesion or into truth, which makes I don't want to say it's good or bad, but it is like beneficial.
Well, it's necessary for there to even be a new story or a continuum or an evolution of a story. So, the reason civilizations fall, societies fall, religions fall, spiritual movements, shit like that fall is because, okay, cool. Every movement that is currently happening or has happened was succeeded by a previous movement, right? Belief structure, whatever the fuck you want to call it. And Mercury then shows up. It's like, I get the point, guys. These agreed upon morals and structures and beliefs and stuff like that. We now understand where it goes when you live 100 years, 1,000 years with this moral compass. Now I'm going to go in there and here's X-Hamster and Pornhub. It's like, oh no, what the fuck? Like, you can't fucking do that. It's like, it's almost like it's just breaking the boundary of what was. So morale may serve a purpose for a certain amount of time. And then when Mercury comes in, Mercury shakes those boundaries. It starts to push and break those boundaries because Mercury doesn't live anywhere except only in boundaries, in line, which is always a liminal space. Mercury shows up.
I was just about to say,
changes these things.
He travels through liminal space.
Yeah, he only travels to these places. So the idea that Hermes has access to Olympia, Earth, and the underworld, really it's just because he travels through these boundaries. Which, by the way, he is the god of boundaries. So he creates these boundaries, pretending to be Saturn, for example, or something. Any belief system is a boundary. Anything that is a I give something a word, a label. Bam, it's a label.
Like.
It has a boundary. This is what it means, right? When you see a vial and it has a skull and crossbones on a sticker, that means it's shit that you understand. It's like, maybe I shouldn't touch this. I shouldn't smell this. I definitely shouldn't fucking drink this. And I probably shouldn't spill this around my house, around my pets and shit like that, without even fucking thinking. But so Mercury is the line itself that divides the idea of the separation of masculine and feminine, of good and evil, left and right, right and wrong, in and out, above and below, and all this shit. It's actually the thing itself. So the same motherfucker that created these fucking boundaries is the same one that eventually I created his boundaries so I could experience a story through a certain type of texture or textures. Now that I get the point, I get it now. It's not changing. It's actually starting to become repetitive. I'm going to break that boundary and push it a little further and see how far I can go, just for the sake of story.
But it's also the thing, not only is it the breaker, but it's the thing that fuses together.
Yeah, because you can't have two things next to each other if you don't have so Hermes, Mercury, is the god of the joints. So, this bone's connected to this bone, but only because everything's like black, so you can't see. But anyways,
science.
Your forearm bone, I don't know what it's called, and then your shoulder, whatever. They're all connected through joints, right? So there's a really fucking awesome story. Real quick. Okay, so y'all remember the story of like the mistletoe and stuff like that in the Druid mythology system, right? So there was a god, I forgot his name, Balder, I think that was his name. I feel like if Reiner was watching, be like, yeah, that's his name, or not. But anyways, there was this guy named Balder. His mother, some sort of goddess, I don't know what the fuck. When she had him, she went to everything on earth. Everything. Spirits and sprites and fairies and trees and plants and animals and you name it. She went to everything and got everything in reality to agree to never harm her child. Cool. So everything in nature agreed. Loki did not like that. That motherfucker was pissed off about that. He was like... So all the gods would chuck shit at Balder. I think, this is assuming that his name is Balder. Gods would just chuck shit. They would throw stones and boulders and shit like that. Nothing would... It would literally like get near him and just like fall apart. Because his mother made an agreement with everything in this world that it cannot harm her child. So her child cannot get harmed. But Loki, being a trickster god, the quintessential one in Norse mythology, understood it as, well, that's not possible. There has to be something that can hurt him. So he was a little bothered by it. I mean, that's how they say it. I don't think he was bothered. I think he was excited, like, challenge accepted. Because there is a boundary that this motherfucker, because of his mother, cannot be harmed by anyone or anything. So he set out on a quest to go ask everything in nature. It's like, come on. He then turned into something, Loki turned into something else and asked Balder's mother, hey, so you went everywhere. And she says, yeah, except to the mistletoe. I didn't go to the mistletoe because mistletoe is so harmless. So Loki grabbed mistletoe. I don't know if it made an arrow or something or like a blade and dipped it in mistletoe. Whatever he did with mistletoe, he killed Balder with mistletoe. And it's interesting because mistletoe is not a tree. So it's not rooted to the earth. And it doesn't have leaves up in the sky. Mistletoe is very mercurial. Mistletoe actually exists on the tops of trees, which is between the above and the below. So there's something very interestingly mercurial about mistletoe itself. And it was that mistletoe that Loki, the trickster god, used to break something that should have been so fixed. The thing is that being a god that can be killed by anyone or anything is not the fucking Philosopher's Stone. It's not the most fixed of anything in this reality. It's not the truth. So if it's not the truth, you can break it, you can fuck with it, you can destroy it, you can get rid of it.
Cool. Yeah. Yes. Mercury. So we're gonna move up.
We're done with Mercury, Kayla?
Silver, Quicksilver up to silvers, throat chakra, air, lungs, and the third
Communication.
eye. We're going to ether into ether with the third eye, which is the pineal gland, right? And the subconscious, the dream realm.
Well, no. We went from Mercury. Now we're gonna go to silver. So
Yeah.
silver
That's
is
what
the
I'm talking about.
pituitary gland.
Oh, the pineal gland is the crown.
Yeah.
Got it.
So silver is lunar,
Luna.
the subconscious, the unconscious, and it's the pituitary gland, which is right beneath the not biologically, but it's or physiologically, but it's right behind the last one. But yes, it's the moon, which is
In
the
endocrine
pituitary.
system.
So
yeah.
its role is the priest or priestess. Its action is to inspire, and its virtue is perception. My little nerdy partner, Jess, who also helped me with this example,
He's an English teacher.
he's also an English teacher, so he teaches this stuff to his students all the time, which is very helpful for us, is Galadriel. She is the high elf queen. She can read thoughts, has the mirror of Galadriel, which is a fortune-telling fountain that predicts the possible future.
Oracle.
Pretty much an oracle. And she shows Frodo his path and shows him what happens if he doesn't fulfill his destiny. And pretty much like all of Middle Earth dies.
The character Hermes in mythology always has oracles, correct? Right? Which
The
is
hero usually has oracles.
like I feel like I've heard Hermes having bees.
Hermes is the
god.
oracles were first gifted to Hermes. It was a
Yeah.
bumblebee.
The oracle, the bee was gifted, which is just I think so adorable because it's like the conscious mind has these little messengers from its subconscious, which is the moon, right?
Yeah,
The third eye, the
yeah.
intuition.
We see this in the High Priestess Tarot card, who is the guardian of esoteric knowledge. And also, the Fates in Hercules, they're the oracles of the past, present, and future.
Mm-hmm. The fates, even in the Sandman too. I mean, it's classic mythology.
Wow, moving right along.
Okay, I mean, we could go so deep, but yeah, the hypnotherapist is the subconscious, the moon for sure. All right, we'll go to the sun.
Okay, so to wrap it up with the 7 archetypes, we have the sun, which is, their roles are the king and queen. Their action is to lead, and their virtue is pure awareness. So the classical story is Arthur in the Sword and the Stone. We also have Simba from the Lion King, and you see him pretty much deny his role of becoming king and then later stepping up to the plate. And then Aragorn who is the brunette guy in Lord of the Rings, who is the bloodline king of Gondor. Throughout the Fellowship of the Ring, he's there by their side and always holds true to his virtues. He doesn't ever act egoically as a king, even though he knows he has rights to the throne. And he always chooses humility until it is time to take the throne. And even when he does take the throne and is crowned king of Gondor, he unites the free people of Middle-earth under his banner. And when Frodo and Sam and the other 2 hobbits are there receiving their honors, he tells them, my friends, you bow to no one. And so I think that's
Say that again?
my friends, you bow to no one.
The exalted king.
So-
Yeah.
The exalted king.
The Lion King or Simba is perfect because I feel like it is Leo.
Where'd you get that?
It's the lion. Which, if you think about lions in nature, what the lion actually does is
Nothing.
nothing. The lion chills, right? And has all these like other lions, female lions, who are doing the work, and he's
Those are
super
real bad
big.
bitches.
What?
They're the real bad bitches.
It's true. I mean, but just his role, it is to be at service if it's in its like true resonant form, which is like
Well, he's a protector.
if there's something that
He's a leader.
occurs, yeah, there's something that
He's
occurs that is
handsome.
dangerous. You know, the lion's gonna step in and protect everybody. Like,
And you can obviously see this also in the life of Jesus Christ. Not to make it religious, but that is another story that, you know, the people chose him as the king, and he lived a life of virtue and humility.
You talking about the exalted king?
yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I mean, do we have any shadow examples of the king? Just curious. Maybe
Oh.
not. It's kind of hard to think about.
You mean beyond personal examples?
He who shall not be named.
Well, really
I
just
mean, Leos get a bad rap. You know, it's like within the cultural paradigm of attention seeking, you know, like there is an aspect that would be lazy, it would be self-centered, it would be selfish.
but
it would
it's
be
also the abuse of power.
Yep.
So
manipulation,
manipulation,
a cult leader.
selfishness,
Yeah.
all of it, it just pretty much is bucketed under the abuse of power
Right.
and selfishness.
Arrogance to his head.
The king in Lord of the Rings who burns his kid.
Is the king not the one with the ring itself?
Which one
right?
is that? Jess, who's that?
Not Sauron. What is his name?
I don't know.
I don't know. We'll find that out in a moment. But
All right.
all right. Whew, we went
So,
through all
does
that.
anybody have any questions about the 7 archetypes or the examples that we gave, or anything to add before we move on to the biggest chunk
What is the
of
name?
this Instagram live?
Denethor is not the king. The old guy.
I don't know. We shall do research and we can get back to you in a very educated way.
No, we're not. They have the internet.
This is true, but
Do it yourself, he says.
yes, says the king. Okay, cool. So
Okay.
this will be
So,
fun.
if anybody wants to grab like a drink, go to the bathroom, you know, go for it. Next, we're going into Christopher Vogler's 12-step hero's journey, as inspired by Joseph Campbell and told through the original story of Star Wars A New Hope, paralleled with our journey and experience.
So give us 45 seconds. We'll be right back.
Yeah,
Can you
break
pop that
break
over
for like
and replace
5
it?
minutes. We'll be right back.
Don't leave though.
I
Can you
mean,
pop that open and just
Huh?
replace it. Pop that. Pop.
so my good friend Tom Bombadil just busted a bottle of champagne out of nowhere.
Are we going to continue or
Yeah.
okay?
That was like the fake intermission.
Okay, excellent. So should we just pause and leave?
No, this is the intermission. It's happening now.
This is the
Intermission.
intermission. All right.
We'll be back in 5 minutes.
Potty break. All right. Au revoir.
No, don't walk away. No, we don't walk away.
We're intermissioning.
No, we don't walk away.
Okay, well,
Hi. It's me.
I've been watching their dress.
What up, Geoff? But yeah, he is the steward of the throne. The old guy tried to stop. They tried to stop. You guys are talking about the king, or Apollo. It's not that I don't like Apollo. It's that Apollo is so easy to fuck with. Coming from a very mercurial standpoint. And if you think about Hermes, little baby Hermes, when he was born in Arcadia? No, it starts with an A. Anyway, so Hermes, whose father is Jupiter, Zeus, and his mother is Maya. She is a nymph. Maya is a titan, and Zeus, Jupiter is an Olympian. So this is where the two worlds, the old gods, which were all Titans, their reign is about to end because these new gods come into the playing field and they're called the Olympians. I'm just giving you context to fill the intermission thing. But anyway, so, Zeus, Jupiter, is just horny, he like fucks everything. He'll turn into a horse just to fuck a horse goddess or whatever. But he has his way with Maya and she gets pregnant. But she, being a Titan, doesn't want her child to be known by his father or anybody. So she finds refuge in the Pleiades, the constellation of the Pleiades. So there used to be 6 stars, 6 sisters, and the Pleiades comes from Pleia, which is the mother of Maya, and Atlas, who is a Titan as well. I fucking love Atlas. But Atlas and Pleia, they have together they have these children, and they're the constellation, the Pleiades. So Maya finds refuge, and she becomes the 7th star of the Pleiades, or the 7th temple in the Pleiades, and that's where she hides baby Hermes. But interestingly enough, the child between a Titan and an Olympian is Hermes, who is again the god of joints, the in-between space. So he adopts certain character traits from the Titans, but also character traits from the Olympians or from Zeus himself. So there is this expansive playfulness about him. And as we know, Apollo is one of Jupiter's kids. And he is just fucking full of himself. He is not exalted. He's like the quintessential, what is it, Zach from Saved by the Bell. He's just blonde hair, light eyes, and whatever the fuck, super fucking cool. Probably drives a fucking Camaro or some shit in the 80s. And he just doesn't give a shit. Might be somewhat of a jock, somewhat of a bully, blah, blah, blah. So little baby Hermes is born. And what he does, I think as soon as he's born, he goes and steals Apollo's like 50 cows or something, cattle. And that's where his trickery starts to happen. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a fan of Apollo. It's just that he's very easy to fuck with. You want to fuck with someone that's very sensitive, right? You want to poke. You don't have to you don't have to do psychological warfare with individuals like that, because Apollo just wears it all in his fucking sleeve. He's so high and mighty and thinks so highly of himself that he exposes all his vulnerabilities and weaknesses to be fucked with by the comedian, the joker, the trickster, Hermes. So back to the thing I was saying, which was something I'm not a fan of Apollo. It's just like, I don't really respect the dude because he hasn't exalted himself yet, right? So he makes himself king. So, in the story of like King Arthur, before Arthur became king, there was another king that was running the show, and he heard a story about this. He heard a myth about a stone inside of or a sword inside of a stone, and the sword, which is in the tarot representative of the mind, air, right? Truth can be found, expressed through the word, which is air, right? And the stone is like the philosopher's stone, which is truth within itself. So the story is that if you can pull the sword out of the stone, you shall be the most powerful of all kings, like the king of kings. So this king, who's very like Apollo, decides, I'm going to go and get this sword out of the stone. He can't do it. So then he enslaves. This is the tyrannical aspect of the king, by the way, or the masculine, right? Which is not a gender thing. But the tyrannical aspect of him goes and starts to enslave men so that they can, of all ages, so that they can pull the sword out, so that he can steal it or take it for himself and declare it like, it's my power. Fucking idiot. But it's part of the story, like it's necessary. Y'all need to come back. It's been more than 5 minutes.
Okay.
I can't do this by myself. So the king, this tyrannical king, gets all these motherfuckers, and this little dude, this teenager named Arthur, is one of the people or one of the men or young men that is forced to pull the sword out of the stone. And he does. He freaks out. He's like, whoa, I don't want this responsibility. So, again, the archetypes are both the shadow and the enlightened or exalted version. It's all within it, just like gold is found within, like lead already contains the gold, which is going to become one day. So the story of a tyrannical king, there is an aspect of it being represented in its reality as the potentiality through little Arthur, who doesn't want the sword. He doesn't want the responsibility of that shit because that's not what he's here for. He's just a fucking kid. But he's the perfect candidate to become the true king because he doesn't want that shit. He just wants to do whatever the fuck he's doing. Like, I'm a teenager. I'm a kid. I don't want to do anything. I don't want the responsibility because he hasn't he hasn't met his Saturn. He hasn't met his Jupiter that becomes a sage. Like, all that shit winds up happening to Arthur way later in his fucking stories. I forgot where I was going with it, but yeah.
So, okay. I have a poll to take.
Yeah, I was just about to say the same thing.
Yeah. So, we have so much that we could talk about and share about our story, but I'm thinking we might want to bring it back like next week or the week after, and we can describe how the three of us met, how we ended up in Taos, how you two ended up doing alchemy and then teaching it to me, and that whole thing.
Which is our unified experience as told
from the hero's journey with the 12 steps, and with some specifics about how it ties into alchemical laboratory processes and then the curriculum that we are crafting.
So the question is this enough information for you all? Do you want to end here, or do you want us to continue down the process of the 12-step hero's journey?
It's not enough. That's why they're coming to the course in June, the week of the summer solstice.
It's not enough. I'm gonna put a vote in that we reconvene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was told this is gonna take 3 hours, but I guess we're stopping.
We're almost at 2.
Yeah.
So, okay. Are we just making the executive decision here?
I think so, yeah.
We're gonna call it a night.
We're gonna call it a night, especially to be in consideration for those who are on the East Coast.
That was a lot of information to digest, and that alone...
They fucking get it.
I mean, I know they get it, but that alone, you could really sit with it, chew on it, and apply it to your life over the next week or two while we present, until we present the 12-step hero's journey. How about that?
Which gets into very personal stories.
So personal.
So personal.
Reconvene. I agree. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight and sticking with us for this almost full 2 hours.
Reconvene.
And,
100%.
Contributing to the conversation, asking good questions. We really appreciate it, and we will let you know when it is time to reconvene.
And stay tuned for more details because we will be releasing the link to the course next week.
Ciao, bellos.
Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
I'll see you guys next week or the following one. Bye.
Bye.